Hello, Doug here with Abishai Tactical Solutions. We'll do another video today, and this is another one in our series on concealed carry fundamentals or concealed carry basics. Today I want to talk to you about trigger control. Now this is a skill that is related to aiming. It's critical to good shooting. Last time we talked about aiming the firearm, and I want to just show you this firearm's been made safe. You can see the magazine. We visually and physically inspect that. That's a safe weapon. Last time we talked about aiming. Aiming involves sight alignment, sight picture. Sight alignment means the top of the rear sight level and even with the top of the front sight. These are notch and post sights. The front post centered in the rear notch. That's sight alignment. Sight picture is once you extend, looking at the target, sights properly aligned, and the front sight is over the target where you intend to shoot. That's aiming. Now, there's something I refer to as deviation control. Controlling the deviation from the time that you get on target to the time that that bullet leaves the muzzle. Controlling the deviation of the muzzle, movement of the muzzle, so it's not pulled off of the target before that bullet leaves the muzzle and is on its way to the target. And trigger control is critical to that. So let's talk about trigger control. What do we mean by that? Typically what we teach people, and this is not a one-size-fits-all thing, but ideally you're going to place your trigger finger on the trigger on the pad of your finger between the on the pad of the finger between the joint and the tip of the finger. Now, this is not a one-size-fits-all thing based on the size of your hands, the firearm that you've selected. You may or may not achieve that ideal placement, but you can achieve trigger control even if you don't have ideal placement. So I don't want to make that a dogmatic thing that has to be, but that's what you want to strive for. One of the problems if you have just the tip of your finger on the trigger, you tend to push it to the left. If you're right-handed, if you're all the way out holding it on the joint, you'll tend to pull. And so ideally you want to place the pad of the finger there. And then what we strive for is a press. Some people use the term squeeze the trigger. I like to talk about pressing the trigger because we're trying to press that trigger straight back smoothly and consistently until it breaks. You heard that click, it broke. So that is proper trigger control as it relates to pulling the trigger. Now there's more to trigger control than just pulling the trigger. We also have to talk about trigger reset. So pressing the trigger straight back smoothly and consistently until it breaks. Now some people talk about having a surprise break, but the reality is if you know your weapon and you spend enough time both with dry fire, which is what I'm doing right now, dry fire practice can teach you proper trigger control, as well as out on the range with live fire. You should get used to your gun. You should know it well enough that you know where that point is that it's going to break. I've had this Glock 19 for almost 15 years. I've carried it for a long time. I know the trigger well. I know I can load up on that trigger, and I know when I'm there, and then I can take it that next bit to fire the weapon. So knowing your firearm and spending enough time with it, both with dry fire practice as well as live fire in the range, you'll get to where you know right where that point is. But you want a steady, consistent pull through that point that it breaks so that there's no deviation of your muzzle. Now watch that again as I do that. I want you to see that we do that so that the muzzle hopefully have very little movement as you press that. Now, another aspect of trigger control is what we call trigger reset. Now, we'll do that again. So we fire that first shot. Now, the trigger, when we have a live round in there, of course, when we fire the shot, that slide would be driven backwards by the force of the gases expanding in the barrel, and then it would rebound from the spring, recoil spring. It would rebound, resetting the striker. Now I've still held that trigger down. Now listen for that click as I let go of the trigger. Right there is my reset point. I can now pull the trigger again and fire. Again, you find that reset point right there, and I can fire again. you don't have to let that all the way out, come off the trigger, and then pull it again. If you're doing that, we call that slapping the trigger. If you're doing rapid fire and you're coming off the trigger every time and back on it, you're slapping the trigger. And if you're doing that, what will happen is you won't have good deviation control. If you're slapping that trigger, you'll be pulling that muzzle off. Now, I'm exaggerating it, but you get the point. So learning your trigger, knowing where that point is that it loads up and it's ready to break, knowing where the reset point is and being able to then fire again, that's good trigger control. Maintaining that finger on the trigger as you're going through a string of fire. Something else I want to talk about as far as deviation control and trigger control. When you extend out to the target, your full extension, there's something we refer to called arc of movement. And I'm going to exaggerate this again just so you can kind of see it. You see how that is moving out there in an arc. That's just, and again, I'm exaggerating that, but anytime you're holding an object like this with your arms extended, depending on your conditioning, depending on your strength, you're going to have a small arc of even someone who's in really good shape. And by the way, you keep your primary weapon in good shape, and your primary weapon's not this; it's you. So keep your primary weapon up to par and in good shape. And as you're holding out there, you have an arc of movement. So controlling that arc of movement, as well as controlling the trigger, helps us eliminate any deviation of the muzzle from the target. Once from the point of aiming to the time that the bullet leaves that muzzle, we want to maintain that aim all the way through the shot. And trigger control is critical to that. So a couple of things you can do. Dry fire practice. Now, before you engage in any dry fire practice, check the firearm, make sure it's safe, as we always do. Here I have no magazine in there. I'm doing that without the magazine so I can rack the slide and do my trigger reset. Keep the ammunition in a different room. Don't have any ammunition or any loaded magazines anywhere near while you're doing this dry fire practice. Just follow that and be safe. But dry fire, you don't even necessarily have to hold it at extension, although you can, and then look to pull that straight back until you find that point it's going to break, and then break that for that shot, and without having any movement in that muzzle. Then also practice finding that point of reset and firing again. Find that reset and fire again. And watch the end of the muzzle. Strive to do that without any movement. If you'll practice that, it's going to make you a far better shooter. Hope that's helpful. Put that into your routine as far as your training, and then get out on the range and do it with live fire. And I think if you do that for a few weeks, have a regimen of doing dry fire practice, and then follow through with live fire out on the range, practice good trigger control, and make you a much better shooter. And as always, as we always say at Abishai Tactical, you're the apple of God's eye.